All right, Yosiah in Virginia. Do the hosts believe there is objective morality? Good question. Yosiah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, guys. How's it going?
It's going good. Excited to hear from you. What is your version of this question?
Well, I guess it's very serendipitous that I went after right after Javier. I do agree with what he was saying in terms of a framework deciding your objectives. For example, in a Christian framework, things like what you had mentioned earlier, the hypothetical of killing just for fun, would be objectively wrong in that framework. However, there could be a situation in another framework where that is not necessarily objectively wrong. Take, for example, in a harm principle framework, in which we come up to, I'm one to kill somebody just for the funsies. Mm-hmm. You would be within your right to kill me and respond if you see me harming somebody, and that would be objectively correct in that framework. So I was wondering, do you guys see it in that way, in which there are objective morals, or do you take more of it's relative depending on the situation?
Oh boy. Well, I think that the word that all of this is, based on is the word objective. And there is a lot of baggage that people bring when it comes to objective. Coming from religion, my idea of objective meant outside of myself. And I think a lot of people think that, when they're talking about objective, it means my opinion doesn't matter. It is just this way. And so we kind of internalize what we understand about the world around us. And from a religious perspective, we go, okay, well, it doesn't matter. It's still true. It's still objective because it was handed down from on high. And as I started losing my faith, as I started learning more about what other possible answers there were other than just the religious answers for things, I found that objective is what we agree to. The objective is just that kind of consensus agreement. And so we can set the objective to whatever the hell we want. And so there are some people who don't use that word that way, and they'll go, okay, well, then that's moral relativism. You're toast. It makes me uncomfortable. I feel very awkward and terrible about that. So it can't be true. But ultimately, if we agree upon what the objective is, if it is well-being, if it is human flourishing, then we can point to that objective when it comes to making those decisions. So is there objective morality? If you're willing to grant my definition, then sure, why not? But if objective morality is something that can only come from a God, then no, I don't.
Right. And I do grant that. I feel like it's a lot of similar to how I see morality, that we set the standard for what we are willing to tolerate and what is the consensus on a topic. And that would be, once we come to that decision, that's when we decide that's objectively the goal. So from like a humanist perspective, the goal would be the flourishing and betterment of humanity. So I guess when I come against theists, their framework is more so rooted in accordance with whatever whatever God says. And I have some difficulty discussing this topic is because of what you mentioned by saying, when I get to a certain point that saying, well, if we use this principle as an objective, or we use this principle or this perspective, they see it as only being relative. They're not seeing it from a objective standard. Yeah. But then somebody is creating it, therefore.
Well, I was going to say, at which point, the word objective just dissolves in a puff of smoke. Right. If you're not willing to grant that, then there is no objective. It just becomes a nonsense word.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's the issue I come across is, I guess, it's pinpointing what is objective. I feel like in the start of the conversations, they typically go that it's outside of the human influence or opinion. And I guess with that framework in mind as the definition, stepping into the territory of man-made moral ideas automatically makes it subjective in the theist mind and in the theists that I have spoken to.
I wish that the troll in the chat would call in. They've got some really, really awesome points I wish that we could discuss. Person in the chat, get some guts and call in.
Yosiah, Eric, I am going to challenge both of you.
Yeah, you're giving me looks.
I am going to take this in a different direction.
Okay.
I think that the key word here isn't objective at all, it's morality.
Okay.
If you understand how people use the word morality, regardless of how they see it, subjective, objective, what are they trying to say when they use the word morality? What is the consensus, regardless of what they think that morality is?
I'm having trouble understanding your question.
When someone says, "What is your morality?" or "I am a moral person," regardless of what that moral structure looks like, what are they saying when they use that word?
They're referencing a shorthand, essentially.
For what?
For the social.
I would say probably.
Oh, go ahead.
I didn't want to enter. I would say probably they were referencing like a shorthand for possibly like is ought. For example, if they're saying that I'm a moral person under theism, under a Christian framework, therefore they are in accordance with what God demands. So if they would be saying outside of that, if you are not within this framework, you should not do X, for example, or if you are in this framework, then you should do X, for example.
Okay. Let's get a little deeper, because I think that that's a good first layer. When we should or should not do something, why should we do or not do something across frameworks?
Across frameworks from like...
Why would a Christian say, my morality requires me to obey God, and a humanist would say, my morality requires me to respect others' autonomy? Based on the word that it's used, I'll cut to the chase. Is it good for us? We obey God because it is good for us. We are humanists at the end of the day because it is good for us. That is the meaning of the word morality as it is used pragmatically in conversation and in debate. Of course, philosophically, there are terms, the dictionary will have a lot of different versions of this, but when you're talking with someone and they say, do you have objective morality? What they're asking is, how do you know what is good for you? And for me, how do we know what is good for us? And so I think that what we end up doing a lot of the time is creating scenarios like, what about murder for funsies? And that no longer falls into the category of morality, because in no moral framework is that going to be good for anybody. And so the conversation inevitably turns into something that is not about morality at all. The conversation should be, you are a moral person by your standard. I am a moral person by my standard. How do we find something that is good for us together? As opposed to saying, well, what about this standard where morality doesn't even come into play, where we're all just anarchists in the worst sense and just murder everybody? And, that's an amoral system. That's the concept of amorality. Morality no longer exists.
I feel like I see where you're coming from, but you're making some charitable assumptions that I don't think that we can necessarily rely on to get there. You're assuming that the other person has a similar enough morality to you that you would even be able to have that conversation. I mean, the point there, and I first I agree with you in part though, because the question isn't how can we convince people to be moral? It's we're behaving in a moral way. somewhat. Why are we doing it?
Well, I think if you get down to brass tacks with anyone of any morality, ultimately you're going to come down to, because I think that is a good thing to do.
Sure.
I think it is good for me to do that, even if they have made decisions that we disagree with, because maybe impact is more important than intent, or because ends justify the means. Ultimately, you're going to get down to, I think that this is good for us. I think we should obey God regardless of what God says, because God wants what is good for us. And we should just do that because we're trusting that God knows what is good for us. So I think conversations around this topic end up getting off course because, for the most part, what we are asking is not, what about people who have no moral compass at all? What about an amoral system where morals do not exist? That's a different topic. We could have that conversation, but that's not what anybody wants to talk about when they're talking about where does your morality come from.
But it sounds like you're phrasing it in a way that doesn't talk about where your morality comes from. It specifically talks about why you ought to convince somebody else that your, moral take is better than theirs, but it doesn't have anything to do with why it's there. Like, I feel like it's answering a question that you came up with. That's fantastic, but it's not necessarily the question I encounter enough.
In my experience, and Yosiah, I know that I kind of took the ball and ran with this, and I'm curious what your thoughts are.
No, go ahead.
In my experience, the reason we care about the why is because we are practically concerned with how that is going to be rectified. And can we justify it? And can we convince the other person to believe that our morals are the best ones for everybody?
Yeah, that's not the conversation that I have. So I will agree with you in that case. Sure. Okay. The conversation that I have isn't about that, though. My interlocutor is generally not somebody who's going, okay, what are the pluses and minuses there? The question is, why is it this way? Not why should we, why ought we, why is yours better than mine? Or no, it's why is it this way?
That's fair.
They're different questions.
That's fair. But I think that too often it becomes muddied, and we need to differentiate between the is and the ought there. Because if we are going to end up having an ought conversation, you ought to have my morality. Secular humanism is better than Christianity because of these oughts. Then we need to be talking about the morality piece, not the objective piece.
And as far as the ontological conversation is concerned,
right. And you cannot use oughts in that conversation because that is no longer the argument, right? You can have the objective, where does it come from, what is real, and the ought conversation, is your morality better than mine, and ought we to have your morality or my morality? But we cannot, we need to separate the two.
Agreed.
Because otherwise it just becomes super muddy and we risk circular arguments.
And we risk appeals to consequent, which is just fucking awful.
Yosiah, what are your thoughts?
That was just very insightful to see both perspectives, because as you were speaking, I was getting there was some things that I would push back on, but then as the conversation evolved, I got exactly what you're saying. I do agree. In my experience, the conversation does end up shifting from the is to the ought. And I think that is because the theist framework is God. So that is going to be their entire basis for everything. So if a conversation is going to be start off with the is of morality, as you're saying the things you're saying, they might be agreeing in some sense, but then getting to that ought part is the difficult part. I guess it just naturally flows into the ought from that conversation. So
yeah, I think
I guess it is.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm really excited about this conversation. I think that this is something that, honestly, you guys, this is something I just thought of, so I have not done enough of that deep introspective, well, if this then that kind of logic behind it. So I need to do more thinking, but I kind of love where we ended up, making sure that when we're having this conversation, we are at first, the first thing out of the gate is to say, okay, are we having an is conversation or an ought conversation? and keep it in that realm until we decide as a group to move it into the other one.
I see that as being the precursor to the general frustration that I have, and then whenever this happens, because generally when I talk to an apologist, it goes from, do we agree on this ought? Mm-hmm. Do we both agree that killing for funsies is wrong? Okay, why is that? And then is. And so it starts with trying to find a common ground on the ought, and then shelves the ought and moves the conversation generally towards, and that, like, I feel like most of those are is.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
I don't want to just jump in, but I feel like I understand exactly what you're saying. I was watching a debate on Talk Heathen the other day, in which a hypothetical was posed that to a Jewish individual, that stealing is wrong. If God said, "Thou shalt not steal," that would be wrong. The theists agreed and the atheists agreed. However, when the caveat was put, is stealing always wrong? For example, if I need to steal food.
Yeah, Jean Valjean.
Or something.
Yeah.
Exactly. The individual then said, well, at that point, I'm not sure, because there's the two juxtapositions there between God saying this is wrong and I ought not do it, but in the context of saving someone, it would be good. So I guess since the conversation naturally flows to the oughts, I think it would be beneficial to hash on the is part and get to that first, so we can have a more fruitful discussion moving forward.
Agreed. Good luck. Yosiah,
exactly. That's the hardest part.
Oh my gosh. Well, I found this conversation very beneficial to me personally. I hope, Yosiah, that it was fun for you as well.
It was extremely fun. More fun than I thought. I've been twiddling my thumbs thinking, should I call today or should I wait another week? But I'm glad I decided to do it this week. Maybe I'll hop on in more often.
Yeah, we would love to talk with you.
Take care, Josiah.
Yep, you guys have a great day.
You too.
You too.
Bye.
That was good for me. Was that good for you? That was good for me.
Hey, check in, consent, aftercare, all those things, not just necessary for sex. Also, if you are like Yosiah and you've been thinking, hey, should I call the show this week? Is this the week to call? It's always the week to call. Just give us a call. We're not going to be scary. We're not going to bite you. Like, again, unless you would like to
consent.
We really want to talk to you. We've had some amazing first-time callers this week that have brought their A game. I am
Sounds good. Yeah.
so impressed.